Hello and welcome to History Time. Ellayamman, Gangayamman, Punniyamman, Peeliyamman, Thulukkanathamman, these are all temples that dot various parts of Chennai city. What is the story behind each of these? Because they are all guardian deities. Some of them are very easily explained, but Thulukkanathamman is a little difficult to comprehend. Come, in this episode, let us see what is the explanation behind that name. Gangayamman and Punniyamman are usually located where water bodies once were available in plenty. Today, those temples stand there even though the water bodies are no longer there. Ellayamman is a boundary deity. She is a guardian. Similarly, Peeliyamman from her very name indicates that she stood wherever palmyra groves existed at one point of time. Where did Thulukkanathamman come from? The name itself is quite a puzzle. In order to identify the etymology of this name, we have to go back to the Tamil dictionaries. The Agaradi and the dictionary published by the Madras University indicate that Thulukkanam is whatever is associated with the country of Turukka or Turkestan. That is not modern Turkey. We actually are going back to a history that begins from the 9th or the 10th century, when Indians were aware of merchants coming all the way from Turkestan. Where was this Turkestan? Even today, when you go to Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, you will find that there is an area known as Turkestan. And that was where merchants were coming from. From the 7th century onwards, this entire area was essentially dominated by Islam, and eventually the Sanskrit word for Muslims became Turushkaha, and in Tamil it became Thulukkargal. What could be the connection between Muslims and this goddess? That is what we need to see. And when we look at the stories behind the establishment of some of these temples, we find that they all date back to around 300 years or so. And that is when we realize that the Golconda army, the Nawab of Arcot's army, the Mughal army were all coming to Tamil Nadu and setting up camp over here. And therefore, these temples have something to do with the arrival of the Muslim forces from the north. The 17th century classic work Kutrala Kuravanji of Thirukuta Rasappa Kavirayar has a passage where the heroine Vasantavalli is having her palm read by a Kuratti, and she asks the Kuratti, "What do I know about your antecedents? Can you tell me about your credentials as someone who can foretell the future?" And the Kuratti then lists the various countries where she has been famous for her ability to predict what is going to happen. She talks about Vanji, Malainadu, Kongu, Kochi, Makka, Marada, Thulukkanamechchi. And therefore, we realize that by that time, much of what was north of Tamil Nadu was also being referred to as Thulukkanam, that particular area. And therefore, we are able to reasonably establish that the temples, the Thulukkanathamman Kovil, had something to do with the armies that were coming from the north and settling over here. Now, let us see the areas where Thulukkanathamman temples exist. You will find them essentially in Chengalpet, North Arcot, and in Chennai. You will not find them further south in areas such as Tanjavur, Madurai, Tirunelveli, etc. And therefore, this establishes our claim even further. And within Chennai city, you will find that Thulukkanathamman Kovil exists in Old Washermanpet, Zameen Pallavaram, Kotturpuram, Mambalam, Thiruvallikeni, Mylapore, and a few other places. And when you look back at the history behind some of these temples, you will find that they are very closely linked with the arrival of an army. The temple in West Mambalam, for instance, claims that around 300 years ago, an army came from the north, and it was only after that that the temple was established. The old Washerman Pet temple goes even further. It says Deccan Muslims came in an army and they established a temple over here. The Koturpuram temple is known as the Dandu Thulukkanathamman temple. What does Dandu indicate to you? In Telugu and in Tamil, it means a camp for an army. And therefore, wherever the Arcot army was coming, it was establishing a Thulukkanathamman temple. Muslims were establishing a temple for the Hindu soldiers to worship in those areas. Why were they establishing a temple in all these places? Those were the days of the great pandemics. Smallpox, chickenpox, cholera, plague, anything could happen, and if any of these broke out, an entire army could be wiped out within a matter of days. And therefore, they all needed guardian deities. These were the goddesses that they prayed to in order to prevent diseases from breaking out. This is why even today in places such as Coimbatore and Bangalore, you will find plague Mariamman temples. These go back to the time when plague was an epidemic in those areas. Very interestingly, after the Arcot Nawab's time, the British came here. They set up their camp in St. Thomas Mount. Not far from there in Paravanthangal, there is a Thulukkanathamman temple, and it has a very interesting backstory. Colonel Morrison was in charge of the regiment in St. Thomas Mount, and one day when he went out on horseback, the hooves of his horse struck a stone, and then he went home, and that very evening he got a very high fever. His butler, Santiyappan, prayed to goddess Thulukkanathamman because he realized that the stone on which the horse's hooves had touched was that of the goddess. And he prayed that if his master becomes all right, a temple would be built for her. Colonel Morrison recovered and the temple was built, and there is a stone inscription even today in the temple which records this fact. In recent times, it has become a tendency to rename the Thulukkanathamman temples as Thulirkanathamman temple. But this word or this new phraseology doesn't seem to have any meaning at all. And therefore, we seem to be on reasonably good ground to believe that the name comes about because of a very strong association with forces of the Nawab of Arcot, and that these goddesses were meant to ward off diseases. They were all established in villages where the armies camped. Over a period of time, as these villages became part of Chennai city, the temples became part of the city and they lost the meaning for which they were set up. But happily for them, they continue to remain in worship. If you like this episode, do share it with your friends and subscribe to this channel. And I promise to be back with you soon with further episodes from the history of Madras, that is Chennai. Bye for now.